If you want to be turning to John chapter 14, you can do that. I was mentioned just a little bit earlier. Conversation that took place between Jesus and some of those that were in the upper room. And in John chapter 14, it really starts out, very familiar passage. We hear it a lot. Sometimes we hear it a lot at funerals, and not necessarily that that's exactly what Jesus was talking about. But beginning in verse 1 of John 14, Jesus said, "Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you, for I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And you know the way where I am going." Now, this first part is from Thomas. Thomas says, that he said to him, "Lord, we do not know where you're going. How do we know the way?" Jesus said to him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on you know him and have seen him." Interesting conversations taking place, and sometimes we get the picture, not that it's that much of what we're talking about this morning, but just in looking at the context here, we get the picture of Jesus up there building on mansions. He was going to the cross, is where he was going. And the preparation for us was made by what he did. I realize that's maybe a little bit different way to look at it, but I encourage you to study that. Not right now. We're going on something else. But study that at home. Look at that and see if that may be what this passage is saying. Later on we can spend a little bit more time on it. But Thomas says, we don't know where you're going. And Jesus is saying, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me." What he was in going to the cross, he was making this way. And Jesus then brings it to, "If you known me, you would have known my Father also. From on you know him and have seen him." What did Jesus just say? You've seen who? God, the Father, right? All right, so Jesus just said it. And listen to Philip. Philip said to him, "Lord, show us the Father, and it's enough for us." Some translations, you may have one, say, "and we'll be satisfied." Jesus, just show us the Father. That'll be enough. What has he just done? What did he do in their midst? What is happening with all of this and the conversations that are taking place? And where is he getting ready to go? He spent 3 years with these men. And Jesus really kind of responds that way. Jesus said to him in verse 9, "Have I been so long with you, and yet you have not come to know me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, 'Show us the Father'?" So Jesus responds with that kind of reaction. Have you been with me all this time and you don't know me? Jesus just made the statement, "If you'd known me, you would have known the Father. From now on, you know him and have seen him." Philip didn't get it. It's so easy to pick on Philip. Probably the rest of them were thinking the same thing. "Show us the Father." Jesus says, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father." Verse 10, let's finish the context here, and we're coming back to this. "Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? The word that I say to you, I do not speak on my own initiative, but the Father of being in me does his works. Believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. Otherwise, believe because of the works themselves." If you're going to believe what I say, at least believe what I do. "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will also, and greater works than these will he do, because I go to the Father. Whatever you ask in my name, that will I do, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask me anything in my name, I will do it. If you love me, you will keep my commandments." And he goes on then to start explaining to them that he's going to end his Spirit. Then they'll understand. We have not in so distant past covered, and even on Wednesday nights in studying Colossians, covered some of the passages that deal with the oneness of Jesus and the Father. Some of the passages that deal with the fact that Jesus is God. I mean, how could we ignore, even a moment of this morning without at least glancing at those passages? The point that Jesus is making in John chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through Him, and apart from Him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In verse 14, kind of summing all that section up, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw His glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. Jesus, God, Jesus, Creator. If you turn to Hebrews chapter 1, in verse 3, and there's so many passages we could go to examine this, but we're just glancing at a few. We've studied this in the recent past. In verse 1, God, after He spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets in many portions and in many ways, in these last days has spoken to us in His Son, whom He appointed heir of all things, through whom also He made the world. Hebrews chapter 1, now verse 3. And He is the radiance of His glory and the exact representation of His nature, and upholds all things by the word of His power. When He had made purification of sins, He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much better than the angels, as He has inherited a more excellent name than they. He is the radiance of His glory and the exact representation of His nature, of the Father's. And so Jesus is saying to His disciples, and I'm not going to go to any more of those passages right now. There's Colossians chapter 3. It's full of them. Jesus is saying to His disciples these things that others are writing about, these things that He's already made statements about, that if you have seen me, you've seen the Father. If you know me, you know the Father. All of this, and all of this that is taking place or getting ready to take place in this upper room with those that are closest to Him. And Philip says, just show us the Father. And that's enough. Just show us the Father? What did it take for Jesus to be man? What did it take for Jesus to live on this earth? As Philippians chapter 2 puts it, not regarding equality with God something to be held onto or grasped, but He let go, taking the form of a servant. And not only that, but taking the form of a servant and humbling Himself to death, even death on a cross. What did it take for Jesus to show us the Father? It's not really a just kind of sentence you would want to start. But Philip was honestly expressing how he was feeling. Just show us the Father and that will be enough. Had Jesus not shown them enough? Okay, it's easy to be tough on these people. They had seen it all. They'd seen the dead raised. They'd seen the blind come to see. The deaf could hear. The lame could walk. He had forgiven sin. Sometimes we never have enough. How much proof do you need? We don't always like to walk by faith. There were plenty of examples of people in the Scriptures that were the same way, and some of them maybe it had to do with the approach. You know, Philip he's saying this, and Jesus comes down kind of hard on him. But you hit no indication that Philip, starts crying and leaves the room. He stays there and he listens. He takes it. He really is wanting to see what Jesus has to show. There were others. You remember back Gideon? I mean, here's this man in the book of Judges that we read about. And turn over to Judges chapter 6. It'd be hard to find again. Judges chapter 6. Beginning in verse 11, it says, Then the Lord came and sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out the wheat in the winepress in order to save it from the Midianites. They were under oppression again. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior. And you guys know, I've mentioned this before, that statement seems so funny to me for a guy that's hiding in the wine press, beating out the wheat. I mean, that's not the place you would normally beat out the wheat, but he's hiding in there doing it so that the Midianites can't get it. Doesn't sound like a valiant warrior, but God is considering him as such. Then Gideon said to him, verse 13, O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. And the Lord looked at him and said, Go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? This still seems kind of funny to me. Here's this guy, he's hiding out, he's doing the work so they can have grain, so they can have flour, and they can make their bread, but he's hiding doing it because he doesn't want the Midianites who have come in and oppressed him, he doesn't want them stealing it, taking it away from him. God calls him a valiant warrior, and he says, God, where has God been? You know, heard, he saved us out of Egypt, and he delivers us as a people. Where has he been? And God says, oh, in this, your strength. Your strength? Does it sound like Gideon has a whole lot of strength right now? The Lord looked at him and said, Go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? What is his strength? His strength is the fact that God has sent him. God is drawing upon that when he says, Have I not sent you? He's telling him. Jesus is telling Philip and the rest of them, you have seen the Father. I mean, Gideon goes on. That's not the first part. Of course, he wants to know for sure if this is God that is talking to him and telling him to do the things that he's doing. And he tests God several times. You know, there's the incident with the fleece on the ground, and he says, just let the fleece be wet in the morning, or rather, the fleece be wet, the ground be dry in the morning, and if you do that, I'll know that it's you that's talking to me. Sure enough, he gets up in the morning, and the fleece is wet, the ground is dry. It says he wrings it out into a bowl. There's so much dew on the fleece. So he's supposed to know that it's God now that is sending him against the Midianites and gathering the army together. And he says, just one more time. This time, make the ground wet and the fleece dry. Then I will know for sure that it's you, God. Sure enough, he gets up the next morning, ground's wet, fleece is dry. Okay, it's you. How much does it take for us to be convinced that we can live life for God? That we make choices that will seem foolish to other people, but it's the right thing to do. Paul took pleasure in the fact that he would be considered a fool for Christ. But it kind of takes some faith, doesn't it? God, are you sure you want me to do that? It's not always those that are seeking God that ask the questions or that say we want a sign. Matthew chapter 16. Jesus dealt with these people a little bit different than he was dealing with Philip. Matthew 16:1 says, the Pharisees and Sadducees came up and tested Jesus. They asked him to show the sign from heaven. But he replied to them, when it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. In the morning, there will be a storm today, for the sky is red and threatening. Do you know how to discern the appearance of the sky, but cannot discern the signs of the time? I mean, why would they be coming to Jesus and asking for a sign if there hadn't already been things done? And evil and most adulterous generation seeks after a sign. A sign will not be given it except the sign of Jonah. Jesus makes this statement more than once. If you go back to chapter 12, and we skipped over just a little bit there, but chapter 12 of Matthew, this time verse 38, and some of the scribes and Pharisees said to him, Teacher, we want to see a sign from you. But he answered and said to them, An evil and adulterous generation craves for a sign, and yet no sign will be given to it but the sign of Jonah the prophet. I mean, he goes on with this to explain a little bit more there that he didn't explain later on. For just as Jonah 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so will the Son of Man be 3 days, 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Sometimes we're faced with things and we're not exactly sure how to handle those things. It may require a decision on our part. And we just want God to tell us. We just want God to show us. Just want an answer. Right? We've been there, Philip. We know what that's like when we don't understand. These guys really didn't understand. But there was a difference in those that were seeking God, truly seeking God, and those who weren't. Without judgment at all. I want to read something. I read it online, and this guy by the name of Matt Slick, and I can't tell you right now because I didn't get that part printed off. It didn't print off on here. But he has a website, and he has conversations. Apologetics, which is the study of the evidences of Christ in particular, and for this website. He has a website that he has articles and things like that, but he has private conversations with people about these things, and then he gets their permission, those who will let him, and he puts the conversations online. So you can see how people have questions and then how they argue back and such. And I want to read this to you, because we run into people that may fall into this and into this pattern, and I think I can read it all fairly quickly. So this conversation began when I pursued an individual who entered a Christian chat room and posted very profane and insulting things about Jesus. He flooded the room with blasphemous text. I knew he would be bounced from the room, so I quickly opened up a private chat with him so not to lose contact with him and hopefully to be able to witness in spite of my deficiencies. This dialogue is that chat that we had. However, I removed the foul language. Also, he wrote in all caps. So you know when I'm reading his, it's all in capital letters. I would like to add that I used a speech recognition program that converts speech into writing. This explains why I have much more text than he does. So this guy's is Matt, and he is going to be speaking with Dan. I'm not angry with you. Matt, I'm not angry with you, just curious. Dan, stop fooling yourself with this. The Bible was written by a man. Somebody made up the Bible. Matt, actually it was written by about 40 men over about 1,600 years. It is impossible that it would be made by one person. Dan, yeah, and how do you trust the men's word? The Bible is all lies. Matt, I do a lot of research. So what in the Bible is lies? Dan, Jesus was just an ordinary person, just like me and you. Matt, how do you know? How do you know Jesus even lived? Dan, not his real name, put in a website that was very offensive. Matt, okay, nice website. So why the hatred? Dan, it is not hate, it is the truth. Matt, so what is the truth? You haven't said anything of any substance yet. All you have done is cussed. Dan, religion is just a tool used by you fanatics to fool humans. I can prove all religions wrong. Matt, religion is a tool for a lot of people. Religion has been used by many people to control others. Matt, there are a lot of wackos out there. Dan, how can a human be God's creations when a human can create a human? Matt, that is not necessarily a logical question. There can be a creator and mankind can create. Just because people can make things does not mean God does not exist. Dan, I didn't say God does not exist. I'm trying to prove the Bible, Torah, and Quran wrong. Matt, I would help you with the Quran, but I have to admit the Bible has intrigued me. Dan, laugh out loud, whatever, man. You are blinded with stupidity. Laughing out loud, are you on crack? Matt, no, I'm not stupid. What you assume to be true will sometimes be proven to be true if all you seek is what you want to be true. There is far more to this world than you are aware of. Dan, I will not believe in anything unless I see the truth for myself. I never believed that someone can cure the blind 2,000 years ago. Matt, well, I don't think it is a very logical statement for you to make. I mean, can you prove your mother is your mother? Did you watch her give you birth? Do you remember it? Can you put it? If you will not believe anything unless you see it for yourself, how do you know you have internal organs? Then, well, they do a DNA test on me, then it will be proven. Matt, will you watch them do the DNA test and will you see the results and comprehend them? Or will you simply trust what someone tells you? I'm only trying to point out that you're not being logically consistent. Dan, well, there's no need to do that. Matt, how do you know? Dan, why should I do that? Matt, because you're the one who told me that you will not believe anything unless you see it for yourself. Dan, give me a reason why I should prove that I am my mother's son. Matt, I'm simply going by your criteria, your standard. It was just an example. By the way, I have a long website where I put various dialogues from real conversations with people. Since this is a private message, I need to ask your permission. Would it be okay if I wanted to put this dialogue on my website? If you say no, that is fine. Dan, it's fine with me. Matt, thank you. Dan, I always want the proof. I will not follow some blindly. Matt, anyway, I was just trying to demonstrate that your illogic was not very good. If that is the criteria that you're using to demonstrate truth, then you're being inconsistent. If you're being inconsistent, how can you know what the truth really is? Dan, just because it is written in the Bible isn't sufficient. Written in Bible isn't sufficient. Matt, proof is a negotiable thing. Different people require different amounts of verification before it is considered proof. And I agree, just because it is written in the Bible doesn't mean it's true. There would have to be something about the Bible or contained in the Bible that would set it apart from other works. If you're interested, I could tell you some of those things, and you could look them up for yourself. Dan, tell me. Matt, I would like to put some verses in here and have you tell me what it's about. I can't or do anything, okay? Dan, okay. Matt, my strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue cleaves to my jaws. Now to slay me in the dust of death. Dogs have surrounded me. A band of evildoers is encompassed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can feel all my bones. They look, they stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. What does that sound like to you? Or what does it remind you of, if anything? Dan, it is something about crucifixion. Matt, yes, you are correct. That was Psalm 22. That psalm was written about 1,000 years before Christ was born. In fact, that psalm begins with the verse, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Was what Jesus quoted on the cross. The point is this: the Bible contains prophecy, detailed prophecy about Christ that has come true. No other book has this. Then, how do you know it was written 1,000 years before Christ? Do you have any proof to back up your claims? Matt, that's a good question. Here's the answer. The Old Testament was completed around 400 BC. This is a historic fact, and there is nobody anywhere of any educational level who studied it that disagrees with this. In the 1940s, a shepherd boy in the Israel area accidentally discovered a pot full of ancient manuscripts. Some of them were dated around 100 years before Christ. Dan, God alone knows the future, but only a historian can alter the past. Thus, no historian be trusted implicitly. Matt, anyway, the Old Testament can be verified to have been written before Christ was born. Therefore, the Psalms were written before Jesus was ever born. There is enough archaeological evidence to substantiate the validity and accuracy of the Old Testament. Dan, you said that psalm was written 1,000 years before Christ. I want proof from you. Dan, well, that might be difficult to produce here in text chat. If I were to quote the Bible scholars to you, would you believe them? Dan, no, I believe not what I hear. Matt, if I were to point you to books or magazines that discuss the issue archaeologically and to demonstrate that the Old Testament was written before Christ, would you believe them? Dan, drop me a link. But their argument is flawed. They cannot determine the exact birthday for Christ. They cannot even say if Christ existed. It's just based on speculations and guessing, no real truth. The Bible is a book which has changed from generation to generation. No one really knows who the author is. I have a link for you. It is about Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament done around 250 C. And he gives the link. This can be used to support the premise that the Psalms were written before the birth of Christ. Now, as far as the Bible having been changed from generation to generation, that is not the case. The New Testament, for example, has thousands of ancient copies in existence from very close to the time of Christ up to several hundred years ago. If the Bible had been changed, then the changes would have been made evident in the copies through centuries. The New Testament, to continue the example, is 99% textually pure. That means that all the ancient New Testament documents, there is very little manuscript deviation. Most of the deviations are word order changes, misspellings, etc. They do not affect the meaning or the accuracy of the text. Dan, laughing out loud, you don't believe me if I tell you I have seen 100 versions of Bible. There are preachers who come to my house every day to tell me that Jesus was born in America. Matt, well, I don't know what preachers would tell you that Jesus was born in America, but Micah 5:2 says that is in the Old Testament, 100 BC, tells us that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Also, all the preachers I know stick to the Bible and what it actually says. Dan, so you see, Christianity is flawed because there are different versions of the Bible. How do I know which is the real Bible? Or is it real at all? Is it the Word of God or not? Matt, it isn't an issue of the real Bible. The reason we have different versions of the Bible is not that they are contradictory, but that language changes. The new translations are simply keeping up with the language changes of the times. That's all. Also, the Greek language, the language in the New Testament, is a very powerful and interesting language. Translating it into English does not always give full depth of meaning. There are shades of meaning in the Greek that do it in English sometimes. Therefore, one translation might be slightly different in the emphasis from that other one. Matt, but this is to be expected when translating any language into one another. I hope this does not sound boastful, but I've had 4.5 years of studying Greek college and graduate school, so I can take a Greek New Testament and can tell you that it is translated properly in our contemporary Bible. And you got to accept the truth. There is no evidence that Psalms was written 1,000 years ago before Christ. Yes, there is evidence. The Septuagint is enough proof to demonstrate that the Old Testament was written before the New Testament was. This brings us to an interesting point. If it is true that the Psalms were written before Christ was born, then its description of the crucifixion would mean to you that there is something prophetic some prophetic validity to the Bible. But if you do not want to believe the Bible, and you will not allow yourself to believe the evidence in support of the ancient authorship of the Psalms, Dan, yeah, right, but I can't see the truth. That's not enough for me to accept. Just because some historian translated the Psalms doesn't mean anything to me. Matt, what you accept is validity. Here's another link that you can look at on the web about the Psalms. Again, what would constitute sufficient evidence for you in order to validate the prophetic truth of the Bible? Dan, if they bring me the Torah, the 1,000-year-old Torah, and they verify that the paper which is used in making the book is 1,000 years old, and they bring me the body of Christ and verify that it was crucified and that it belonged to Jesus, then I will believe in Christianity and I go to church every day. But since you cannot do that, then I will reject Christianity. Matt, you have a problem there. Your requirements are rather impossible. It seems as though you have constructed a requirement that cannot be met. Then I am right in concluding that the issue with you is not whether or not the Bible is true, isn't it that you desire reason to deny its truth? Dan, so is your faith. Your faith is impossible, illogical. Matt, it is not impossible nor illogical. A demonstration of the validity of the Old Testament can be reasonably made. However, the New Testament states that the body of Christ was resurrected and that Jesus, who claimed to be God in flesh, ascended into heaven. He is presently dwelling in the heavens and will return one day. So getting his body is a little tough. The eyewitnesses of the New Testament wrote what they saw. They wrote about the resurrection of Christ. There was no reason for them to lie, since to do so would have meant their death. In a culture they lived in, their claim that Christ was the Messiah who had risen from the dead cost them their families, their livelihood, and eventually their lives, as it did. It is most logical to conclude that they were telling the truth. Dan, this takes us nowhere, as I told you. I want valid proof. I don't believe in history, nor do I believe in people's guessings. Matt, that is how you want it. Then why don't you see if you live that way? So if you're consistent in what you require proof for and what you just accept by faith, and then see if you're inconsistent in what you require as proof about who Christ is. He stopped at this point, so I added this last statement. Matt, thank you for the conversation. You can always get a hold of me through my website. I cannot help thinking how little our witnessing can accomplish apart from the blessing of God. Only can open hearts and minds of people so that they might see the truth of the gospel. Do you see what was happening? It's very, very sad, but it happens every day. It happens with people that you and I know. Jesus dealt with people like that. They could see what he was doing. The signs were evident. The things were happening right around them. And we say, and this was a discussion on Wednesday night here recently, but it is so easy to think, if I had been there, it would have been, I would have been right there with him. Would we have been? There were so many people that fit this pattern. And say, so show us a sign. The scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the leaders of religion. Show us a sign. He had. Now us. Philip had to listen to what Jesus said. Jesus said, I've been with you so long and you don't know me, Philip. So times come, if you guys want to come up, you can. Times come that we want God just to show us. We would absolutely love him just to say something. And the Hebrew writer put it this way, without faith it is impossible to please him. If faith is what we're longing for, what our hope is in, if it brings to life, to substance, that our mind recognizes to be real and true, the substance of things hoped for. Faith is also the evidence of things that are not seen. We could see all signs that there are. We could experience what they experienced when Jesus walked earth, and not everybody would believe. If we are inclined to live life for us rather than emptying self in His example of emptying self, becoming one of us, if we are inclined not to be that way, then it wouldn't matter if He did tell us what to do when we say, I don't know what to do. I need to make a decision. God, I need you to tell me. He needs you to have faith. Because without faith, it's impossible to please Him. And so then, that decision that's made, you know is right. Because it's made in faith. It's made trusting Him. I have no circumstance in mind, no person in mind. But I'm guessing, probably for most of us, we have a direct application to that. If you need to respond to that, come as we stand.